So you've installed NixOS and you're officially a NixOS bro. Well, what happens next? What do you need to do next in order to actually get this thing up and running? Well, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about 10 things you should do immediately after installing NixOS. Now, I've shown you how to install NixOS in a previous video. Basically, it's fairly easy. It's just a Calamares installer. You choose your desktop and then you're done, right? But what happens after that? So we're going to discover that today. But before we jump in, if you leave a thumbs up on this video, I'd be really appreciative. It'd really help the channel. So the first thing you want to do, basically on any distro or any install of any operating system really, is perform your updates. So I'm going to show you how to do that on NixOS. So let's go to this system here. In order to do an update, you want to do sudo nixos-rebuild switch -- upgrade, and then enter. It's going to ask you for your password, and then it's going to do some updating. Now this will take either a little while or not any time at all. It will depend on two things: one, whether or not you downloaded an older ISO, or if you've changed the channel. Now, if you've changed the channel, probably you're not at the position where you're really a noob, but the unstable channel will cause more updates to happen. So I don't know how many updates. It looks like there's going to be actually some updates here to show you. That's good. So turns out my ISO was a little older. So we're going to update this thing. This is what it looks like when it updates. It'll take a few minutes. And it's actually already done. So it took about a minute. Didn't take very long at all. So now that you're updated, what do you do next? So I usually reboot the system. I'm not sure how NixOS handles kernel updates, to be honest with you. I'm still only 11 days in, but I'm still in the habit of rebooting after an update. So I do sudo reboot like so, and it will reboot. We got a big cursor there. I'm going to enter my password, and we'll be right back to where we started. So we will get into a terminal again. So the next thing we're going to want to do is change the home name. So I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can actually see this. And my key bindings don't work for whatever reason in this VM, so we're just going to do it like a Neanderthal. So in order to change your host name, and I'll talk about why this is important here in a second, but you'll want to go into /etc nixos. Now in this directory here, you have two files, configuration.nix and hardwareconfiguration.nix. These two files are essential to any Nix system for obvious reasons. These are like the heart and soul of your Nix system. Everything that is everything is configured inside of these two files. Specifically, we're talking about the configuration.nix file. The hardware one obviously handles the hardware, and you don't really mess with that all that often. You just want to kind of keep it there. The configuration.nix, on the other hand, handles everything from app installs, services, all sorts of stuff. Basically, everything you can think of to do on your system can happen in configuration.nix. Now, there are obviously situations where that's not necessary, where you can do things outside of that file and all that stuff, but that gets into more complicated stuff, and we're not going to get into that in this video. So what we're going to want to do in order to change the home name is to go into that particular file, and the only application to do that in the terminal by default is nano, which is a travesty, but we will just have to live with that. So we're going to do sudo, which is apparently spelled with a J now, nano configuration.nix. We'll enter our password, and here we are in nano. So we're going to do a couple things while we're here. So let me make this full screen. So the first thing we want to do is change that host name. And you can see that it's NixOS by default. You can leave it that if you want to, but I always change it to something else. So in this case, I'm going to name it Hera. I always use Greek gods and goddesses names for my computers. I have other reasons for that, but it doesn't really matter. So one of the reasons why you want a host name is just simply because you may want to find this computer on the network somewhere along the line, or maybe you're trying to SSH into it, or maybe you're wanting to add this to your Flake and you want something descriptive to call it. Having a host name allows you to do that. So that's the next thing to do. Very, very simple. Technically, the next thing you'd want to do after this is rebuild your system, but we're going to make a couple extra changes while we're here. So we're going to go down here all the way to like the mid section. So we're going to want to install a couple programs. So in order to do that, there's two places you can do that. First is this section here where it has your username. These packages are all installed just for your user. Down here below this, there's one called environment system packages with packages, and this would be packages that are installed globally, so for any user on the system. I've just been doing it for the user only. I don't really care about the global stuff, but what I want to do here is install NeoVim so that I can never use Nano again. So we're going to go ahead and Control X out of this, and we'll be back into this file here in just a minute, but we need to do the next thing first. So we're going to hit Control X, hit Y, and then Enter, and then what we're going to do is rebuild the system. So what this is going to do is it's going to change the host name, and it's going to install Vim. So I'm going to do sudo NixOS-rebuild. You're going to be running this command a lot, by the way. And then we're going to do switch, and then that's it. We're just going to hit Enter, and we're going to let it do its thing. Now, it may ask you for your password again if you're not already authenticated, but I already was, so it didn't ask this time. So it will do its thing. It'll take about a minute or so, and then we'll be on our way. Oh, not even a minute. There we go. So now if we wanted to, I could use NeoVim, NVim to do stuff. I now have NVim installed, whereas before I didn't. So that's cool. All right, so that's updating your system and setting your host name. What's the next thing we need to do? Well, the next thing you probably want to do is set up your file system. Now, this is going to be a little bit different depending on what you have. So if you have external hard drives, that's going to be more complex than if you don't have them, obviously. By default, NixOS will set up all your file systems and your hard drives and stuff for the hard drives that are connected inside of your computer. So if whatever you're booting off basically is going to be already mounted because you need to use it. Anything else you're going to have to do on your own. Now, the best way for me to show you this is actually to go show you my configurations. My NixOS configuration file, and I'm going to go to my modules and my file system. So my configuration file is obviously going to look different than yours because I've been on here for a few days and I've had a chance to set up a flake and all this stuff that you don't really need to get into right now. But basically what you're going to do is put something like this inside of your NixOS configuration file. So you're going to need the folder or the directory where you want to mount your system, the device by UUID directory or file. You'll find this in this path. So every Linux system stores the hard drives connected to the system by UUID and then allows you to find that UUID in various ways. One of them is by actually having a file named the UUID. So that is the device. You'll want to tell it what file type it has. Basically what we're doing here, in case this doesn't look familiar, is setting up an FS tab. Now, if you are going to not want your drives auto-connected, you can skip this part. I should have said that first. If you just prefer opening up Thunar or Nautilus or whatever and mounting your drives that way, that's perfectly fine. Still works in NixOS. But if you want to have them auto-mount, the best way to do that is inside of your configuration file, in which case you'll need this. The rest of the stuff is for NFS. I may do a video on that if you're interested in at a future date, but you don't need that now. You just need this, and then there's a couple actually other things you'll need. So once you have that, put that somewhere in your configuration file. Make sure you remember your semicolons and your squiggly brackets. So we're going to go into my services file, and there's a couple things that you'll want to make sure you have set up. So you want services.udisk2.enable equals true, and you want services.gvfs.enable equal true. That basically just allows you to mount things through your configuration file. You'll need those services enabled in order to do that. So you'll want to make sure that those things are also enabled in your configuration file. So the next thing we want to do is actually install some more software. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our VM here, and we're going to want to do sudo, already still in the etc NixOS directory where we were before, and do nvim, or if you're still on Nano, use Nano, and then we're going to want to do configuration.nix. So we're going to want to go down here back to where we set up nvim in the first place, and we're going to do a few things while we're here. So we're going to install a couple programs. So let's install Obsidian like so, and let's install, say, Rofi for shits and giggles. So it basically can be whatever you want. You can just basically list all of the packages that you'll need here. Now, how do you get the names? Because if you've ever used Linux before, you'll know that Linux distros like to name things differently. Well, the best way to do that is to open up your web browser. So we're going to go to the web browser here. See if that actually works. It does. You're going to want to go to a URL called search.nixos.org/packages. And basically what you'll want to do, say we wanted to find Obsidian, we just search for that. It'll tell you that Obsidian is named Obsidian. And if you need the actual, like, for sure thing, go to the NixOS configuration tab here under that, and you'll just know that it's named Obsidian. Now, you do not need packages.obsidian in the file just because it's already been called for you. You just need the package name. So let's take a look at something that is a little bit different. So, for example, let's just say you want Kden Live. If you search for Kden Live, you're going to see that it's not named just Kden Live. It's named KDE packages.Kden Live. So a lot of the KDE stuff is named exactly like that. So the reason why I show you this is because you want to make sure you don't just go into your configuration file and just assume the package name is what you think it is. You'll want to make sure that you actually go to this URL and search for the actual package name. Otherwise, you may come up with errors when you're trying to rebuild your system. Now, there are tools that allow you to search this website from your system, something like NH. So you can install NH and it will allow you to search from the terminal. I will leave a link to that in the video description. So we have these things installed. Technically, the next thing we'll want to do is rebuild the system, but I'm going to make another change here and enable SSH while I'm here. So I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom, or most of the way down to the bottom, and find this line right here. So I'm going to uncomment this line here, and that will allow me to have SSH enabled. So if I want to SSH into this machine, I can do that. If I want to SSH out to other machines, I can do that. Now, depending on your network setup, you may need to change the ports that are available for SSH. I will leave that up to you to do your research on. For me personally, I didn't have to do that. I just had to enable SSH using this line here. So again, it will depend on your network setup for to do that. So now that we've made a couple more changes and we've installed a couple packages and we have enabled SSH, we need to go back and rebuild the service. So we're going to get out of Vim, :WQ or Shift ZZ in order to do that, if you are following along verbatim. And we're going to want to do sudo NixOS -rebuild, switch, enter, and it may ask for your password again, may not. Depends on if you're already authenticated. We're repeating ourselves now, and like I said, you're going to run this command a lot, like a lot. I've gone so far as to create an alias for this thing in order to, so I don't have to type it all the way out every time. I highly recommend you do that. That's not really a tip that's on the top 10 list, but it should be. Make an alias for sudo NixOS rebuild switch, and do one for update or upgrade as well. That way you don't have to type those things out all the time. And that leads me nicely actually into the next little bit. Now this one here is something I can't help you out with very much because I'm still as much of a noob as you are really. And that is learning all of the NixOS commands. The one you'll use the most is the one that we just used. But you'll also want to learn things like the flags for like Flakes and updates and all that stuff. So what I would recommend you do is look at the man page for NixOS rebuild. This will allow you to figure out what is what. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. It's probably going to be overwhelming. You don't need to know all of it, but there are a couple things that you'll want to know before you go in. So if you're doing some major changes and you want to find out how it's going to affect your system, you can do something like dry build. If you want to roll back your system without having to reboot, you can use the rollback flag. There's a whole bunch of stuff here. I highly recommend going in here and reading as much of this as you can stomach. Again, you don't need everything, but you should go in here and at least familiarize yourself with some of these commands. And unfortunately, the NixOS rebuild man page isn't the only man page for Nix. There's a whole bunch of other commands that have to do with Flakes and all sorts of other stuff that you'll probably want to get into as you continue your NixOS journey. But I would start here with NixOS rebuild simply because it's the one you're going to use the most. So definitely check out this man page. I do believe that it's very important. So the next thing you're going to want to do, and this is going to be another thing that I'm going to show you just right in my actual configuration file, and that is setting up your Git users. So if we go to this part of my configuration file, you'll see that I have programs.git equals and then a whole bunch of stuff. Now, this does several things. First, it installs Git, so you don't need to put Git in your programs list. So this is my programs list. This is all of my stuff. I don't have Git up there. I have Git here instead, and that what basically allows me to do is set some options. So I want to enable it, so that installs it, and then I want to set some configuration files. Now this is the magic of Nix, or at least some of the magic of Nix. Usually if you want to set your configuration file for Git, you do so in your Git configuration file, like normal people, right? But on NixOS, you can still do that. You can use the traditional way, or you can do it declaratively here in the NixOS configuration file, and that's done like this. So you hit you set config equals to all of these things. So if you've ever used Git before, you'll know that the first time you run it, it always asks for your name and your email and all that stuff. You can set that stuff right here inside of your configuration file. I've done this. It allows me to basically take this to any other system and not have to set that up, which is, pretty cool. So that's how you set up Git. I highly recommend you do it this way, simply because that's the nature of NixOS. The next thing you want to do, and I'm not going to show you this because I've already done it, but basically what you'll want to do is move your configuration file from the Etsy directory to a Git repository. Now, there's a couple of ways you do this, and the reason why I'm not really showing you is because there's so many different ways you could consider doing this. The way I did it first before I did Flakes was I just copied it out of the Etsy NixOS directory into my Git repository and then uploaded it that way. You could make your Etsy/NixOS directory a Git repository and do it that way. You could move the entire thing to its own directory and run it with a Flake. You could do it that way. So there are many different ways of doing this, and I will link to a couple of resources on how I figured out how to do this. It's just going to be easier that way. But the reason why you want to do this is because you are creating a configuration file that you're going to be using for your entire Nix career. You're going to be doing this thing for a long, long while. And if you were to lose your system, say in a fire, or you've done something stupid and you've deleted the Etsy directory or something, whatever happens to be the case, you've created a system that won't boot. In order to get your NixOS system back, you'll need this configuration file. And the best way to do that is ensure that it's backed up. And Git is the proper way to do that for most people. So set up your NixOS configuration directory as a Git repository. You won't be sorry that you did. The next thing I want to talk about is garbage collection. So one of the things you guys have noticed me do in this video quite often is run that NixOS rebuild switch command. Every time you do that, whether it's an update or you're installing a new configuration file, you get something called a generation. Now, generations are cool. Basically, it allows you to go back to a generation that you know is working if something goes wrong. And by default, NixOS keeps all of these. And that can lead to some problems if you don't have a ton of storage. And even if you do have a ton of storage, this stuff can take up a lot of space on your hard drive. So NixOS has something called garbage collection. Now, you can run this manually, and that's one of those NixOS commands that you might want to learn. But you can also set these lines here, the nix.gc equals and all that stuff. Basically what this does is it basically sets a service in the background that will delete some of those generations on a weekly or daily basis, whatever you happen to set it as. I've had it set to run on a weekly basis. It will delete anything older than 15 days. So basically what that does is it will delete some of those older generations so I don't have a ton of stuff on my hard drive. So I highly recommend setting these 4 lines in your configuration file. The next thing just below this, and this is kind of a bonus, is if you want to set up auto upgrades, so it'll actually do your updates for you, you can use these 2 lines as well. That'll allow you to have it set up for automatically updating your system. And by default, when you go look at the documentation, it has system.autoupgrade.allow reboot set to true. I don't want my system rebooting without my permission. So the last thing we're going to want to talk about is Flakes. Now, this is not an in-depth Flakes tutorial or anything like that. So if we actually go back up a level here in Ranger, you can see that I have some stuff. So I have configuration.nix, flake.lock, flake.nix, and the flake.nix is like the manager of everything in this directory. And as you can see, it just basically sources all of these other files for now. In another video, I'll go through and tell you what all this stuff does. But for now, just know that the last thing, once you get your kind of sea feet underneath you and you have your self set up and you've done your updates and you've installed all your software, you've set up SSH, you've learned about the Nix commands, you got yourself a Git repository, you've uploaded it all to Git, and you're well on your way to being a full-time Nix bro. The next thing to tackle is Flakes. And I'm going to leave a link down below to the video that I used to learn about Flakes. I highly recommend you watch it. It's about 30 minutes long, I think, or so. And that one really helped me figuring out how to get this far, because it also teaches you what a flake is. better than I'm probably going to be able to do so at this moment. So I'm going to wait to make my flake video for another couple of weeks to see if I can't keep getting my head around everything. But the last part on this list for you today is just to kind of start considering your move towards a flake. It doesn't mean you have to use flakes. You don't have to. You can use flakes, and a lot of people recommend that you do. So look into those things, do your research, and figure it out for yourself. That's where I'm going to leave you for the list today. But overall, I think that is what you'll want to do next, is start looking at flakes, and then eventually maybe home manager. I'm not at the home manager part yet, so we'll see how that goes. But overall, those are the 10 things you should do after installing NixOS. If you have thoughts or comments on any of this stuff or questions, you can leave those in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. You can follow me on Mastodon. That link will be in the video description. You can support me on Patreon at patreon.com/thelinuxcast. There you'll find a weekly exclusive podcast where I basically just sit in front of this microphone and ramble for about 15 minutes or so. If you like that kind of thing, support me on Patreon or on YouTube. That comes out weekly, so head on over there. If you want to get something physical in return for your support, you can head on over to the store, which is available at shop.thelinuxcast.org. There you'll find all sorts of stuff, including the nifty I Love Vim hat, which teaches you how to quit Vim if you turn your hat backwards. I should never wear a hat like this, ever. That looks ridiculous. But as you're leaving, you're literally quitting the room. Wow. Okay. And Matt hit the microphone. So, yeah. Just know that Matt should never wear a hat backwards. It doesn't look good. Anyways, that's it for this one. Thanks to everybody who does support me on Patreon and YouTube. You guys are all absolutely amazing. Without you, the channel just would not be anywhere near where it is right now. So thank you so very, very much for your support. I truly do appreciate it, you guys. Just seriously, thank you so very much. I appreciate everybody who's watched this video and managed to get through all my rambling explanations of things you should do after you install NixOS. So thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. I'll see you guys next time. Have a wonderful day.